Okay, I heard a baby there. Who's got a baby in the room?
It's one of my dogs, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. What we thought we'd do today is very much like the health and safety forum we had when we physically met last time. We'll have a very quick round robin. We'll go around the group, just a little introduction, your name, your company name, and what your responsibilities are. And if you have a particular health and safety issue or concern at the moment, as briefly as you can, I'll then make a note of them, and then we can come back to them in Q&As at the end. Okay, I can see the dog now. That's fantastic. Thank you, Brian. Okay, so I don't mind starting. I think you probably all know who I am by now. Tim Gray, Managing Director of Dairy Pack. My responsibility is to steer the ship, metaphorically and physically, fund the business and make sure that we're going in the right direction. I'm not as hands-on as a lot of you MDs are, but that is deliberate because I have other business concerns. My biggest concern at the moment within the area of health and safety is just making sure that we have double-checked everything in this particular time with COVID, to make sure our systems are robust, but also every time I speak to someone, I pick up a really good idea around COVID. So I guess that's why I'm here today, to learn from you guys who've probably done a much better job than we have in Shropshire. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Shall we go around the group, and we'll come to Andy and Mark at the end. So Troy Kane, please.
Morning, Troy Kane, Group Health, Safety and Compliance Manager for Encase. And as Tim was just saying, I think one of the concerns we've got at the moment is COVID. It's a changing landscape, and particularly the autumn months coming on, after the winter months, people come in with colds and the temperatures. What do we do with them? I think so. That's what we're trying to get around at the moment.
Great. Okay,
and
Troy.
Today stuff.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Paul Hanley.
Hi, good morning. My name's Paul Hanley. I'm the Technical Director at Avanti. I've been at Avanti for about five months now. I started on the 23rd of March, and everybody else went home for lockdown. My experiences are engineering. I've worked for SCA, Saika, and the cable industry. I think, like all of you, the biggest challenge at the moment is keeping everybody safe. Ours is quite a complex, because we're doing projects on customer sites, and we've got our operation at Furnace Vale, and it's trying to create pods and trying to keep everybody safe, and in doing that, protecting the business. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Peter Longworth.
Oh, I'm Peter Longworth. I'm the print manager at the Cardboard Box Company. I also have responsibilities for health and safety here. One of the main challenges that we have at the minute is just keeping everybody up to date with the latest information on COVID. It seems that that's going to be a recurring theme around this meeting. And just making sure everybody's up to date with the latest information and still doing what they should have been doing from day one.
Yes. Thank you very much, Peter. Brian Shirley.
Brian Shirley. I used to be with Blue Tree Group, who own the Instant Print and Route 1 brand. I retired August 18, but after getting quite bored, I reached out to John Vick for advice on consultancy, and John presented me with an opportunity with PMC, Printer Media Certification. So my objective with PMC is to try and help them build the business, probably developing our digital marketing strategy. So today for me is really about to meet you guys, and it's exploratory purely for me today, just to see what's happening and just find out as much as I can and learn about SPA.
Okay, okay. All right, thank you, Brian. Chris Bywater.
Hi, Chris Bywater, Nuttall Packaging in Manchester, the COVID unfriendly place in Trafford Park. I'm the managing director. Our biggest challenge, like everybody, is the constant reinforcement of the things that we've put in place. I'm not particularly worried about what goes on inside the four walls. It's what goes on around the rest of Manchester. Yeah, constant reinforcement, and COVID is fairly high on our agenda.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Ken, would you like to say a few more words, or has Peter covered it for you? Oh, Ken, microphone.
There we go. That's a good start. Thank you.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I think, as Peter said, he's directly involved in it on a day-to-day. But this issue is for all members of management. It's for all members of the workforce to be in all the time. I think it's quite interesting. If we look at it, we've had, since the start, we've had 19 people that have gone off for either family or household isolation, none of which have resulted in a test positive for COVID. And that's one of the things that I think I might have mentioned before. From the beginning of May, tests within the north of England have been a lot easier to access and very quick. So, you know, when they're on the 14-day isolation for family, you know, people were going and getting tests, it's negative, and then coming back. Of course, the regulations are changing now because, you know, it's now 10 days for self-isolation. But the point about it is there's been no positives. So that's one good thing. And we have introduced temperature testing as well. So that's going to be intriguing to see where that all goes when there's a test that's sort of for somebody actually too high a temperature, and then see where it goes from the hospital tests. But all round, we're surviving, but it's changing all the time. The rules and regulations are changing. And of course, people are becoming, as just been said, shall we say, a little bit more complacent within society, aren't they? Which potentially has an impact inside the business.
Brilliant, Ken. Thank you very much. Gavin?
Morning all. Yeah, I'm responsible for Logson Packaging Group, and I think, like others have alluded to, the hardest thing at the moment is following the changing, let's call it guidance, as they change it with the days of the week.
Yes. And finally, Wayne, have you anything further to add to what Tim has mentioned earlier?
Hello everyone, I'm Wayne Jones, Compliance Manager at Dairy Pack. Obviously COVID is the buzzword at the moment on this. I'm very interested to see how people in the north of England are dealing with it, because obviously, unfortunately, you've got a bit more experience of outbreaks near you. Just to throw another old buzzword in now, getting quite a lot of questions regarding Brexit and the implications on REACH regulations. So if anyone's got anything on that, knows of any changes, be appreciative of that. But that's just another one in the mix for you. Thank you very much. Great.
And just, we've got 2 people attending who can hear, but they can't input in terms of this. So I'm using chat. So I'm just about to, if anyone wants to ask a question, I'm just sending to everybody. We have a chat facility. If you haven't used it, it's on the bottom in the middle of your Zoom. And if you want to ask a question of myself, and I can field that for Tim, could do that. Or if you have a question to ask while somebody's speaking, then use that facility. So sorry, that was just a technical aspect, but I think everybody is now gone, Tim.
Very good. Excellent. Well, we have a couple of formal presentations today, which will hopefully spawn lots of questions and activity afterwards. I think if you're in agreement, Neil, we'll crack on with the first one.
Yep.
You'll recognise Andy Ely, who's on the call. He's about to give you a wave, so you know who Andy is. You'll have seen him in person at conference or at our Health and Safety Forum. If not, this is the first time you've met him. Andy is our retained health and safety specialist for the Sheep Plant Association. And Andy would like to talk today. He's got a formal presentation, COVID-19 and combating human nature.
Here we go. So Andy, while you introduce yourself, I'll just pull your presentation up.
Yeah, hi. Andy Ely from TUV UK Limited. I'm the Health and Safety Manager for our own company, is one of the hats I wear. Also, sadly, I'm also now Certification Manager. So I have a role which is taking up a lot of my time in our ISO certification department, and also I'm still retaining the role of sort of health and safety technical assistance outside of the organisation as well. So anyway, the presentation this morning is looking at more strategic issues than specific ones, and I know that that Mark, who will be coming along afterwards, he will be bringing up some specific stuff, which looks really good. So it kind of dovetails in quite well. But the intention here is to look at the more strategic issues of how you would deal with the human nature aspects of it. One or two have already been mentioned. So if we go to the first slide then, please, Neil. So anyway, you've got all your stuff in place. You've followed all the recommended guidance from .gov.uk sites and other sources. And I'll take this opportunity to mention specifically, if you go to the BSI Group site, you can find your way through quite easily to their publication, Safe Working during the COVID-19 pandemic. Following that link there, you don't really need that link. You'll just have to go to the BSI site and they'll take you through to it, complete a few details. And they're now on the 3rd edition of that now, August 2020. So it gives you another kind of aspect to dealing with the pandemic in there, sort of a more certification body sort of approach to it. So anyway, you have all your systems running, you've done your planning, you've got supportive management in place, and your risk assessments from which all your control measures are affected. You've got your distancing, hygiene precautions, everyone's had specific training and information, and you've got your monitoring regime running as well, your regular inspections, providing the feedback, and from them, your corrective actions and improvements carried out timely. And you'll notice from that there's a sort of a certification body approach to this. So anyway, if you've done all that, well, you know, what can go wrong? Well, umpteen things can go wrong, and most of them have to do with people. So next slide, please, Neil. So, you know, the negative aspects, possibly you could call it, of human nature. So complacency already been mentioned. You know, you've had these measures in place for quite some time, and people are getting used to them, and no one's died yet. You know, they don't know anyone who's actually contracted it and been tested positive. So there's going to be a slackening off of compliance with the things that you've gone to the trouble of putting in place. And what I would call sort of COVID fatigue, which isn't related to the virus itself directly, but we're all bombarded with stuff, mainly negative stuff from the media, newspapers and TV news, stuff like that, and people just have enough of it. They think, oh, you know, I just can't be bothered with this. And on the other side, you know, people haven't been paying attention. They just got no lack they just got a lack of perception of the seriousness of the situation, and not taking personal responsibility. You know, this is a sort of a vital thing in health and safety anyway, but especially now. I mean, we've seen by the actions of certain parts of our society that people obviously, you know, who thought, well, this doesn't apply to me. It's a bit like dodging my taxes, you know, and stuff like that, or even avoiding them legally. You know, if I can get away with it, that's fine. I don't need to take any personal responsibility. No sense of a common good, a national interest, and of course resentment as well. You know, people having their lives changed by measures that they see draconian. So these things can work against, you know, what you're trying to put into place. Also, social issues, outside and background influences, family influences have been mentioned. Some of the stuff that falls within the ISO idea of the context of the organisation. So all these adverse traits and influences, you know, leading to the inevitable not bothering to follow the procedures, thereby putting themselves, colleagues and families at risk, jeopardising your business and their own jobs. And as we've seen recently, and Neil sent around an example of this as well, whistleblowing sort of outside the organisation. So, you know, something has gone pretty wrong there, you know, if you get sort of whistleblowing outside the organisation rather than sort of reporting within. Okay, next one, please, Neil. Neil, next slide, please. So anyway, the strategic way of dealing with this, or one of the ways that you might like to consider an approach to, is sort of is coming from aspects of ISO 45001. You know, the actions and influences of top management and the management structure itself. I mean, you can see from this slide that all of these things would apply to generally good safety management in general, and not just the COVID situation. So your management at all levels being visible, you know, and having top management personally involved as far as they are able to, and management directly communicating with workforce, encouraging active participation of all personnel, the culture of reporting issues without fear of blame or reprisal, you know, the whistleblowing aspect, but within the organisation, supporting that culture, and management actively involved in and supporting communication and consultation media, the various things that you use for this in your organisation. And the consultation thing in general is ensuring that the flow of information, it runs in both directions. The conduit is bi-directional. So you can see from that that, you know, COVID management, it requires the same as routine health and safety risks to manage, but the focus and frequency might be different, is different from traditional health and safety management. So on to the next one, please, Neil. So specific things to consider, and I have to stress that ISO 45001 is not prescriptive, you know, in what it would actually require. Pretty much it does encourage health and safety committees, but only where they would be, you know, where they will be practical to implement. So the things you might like to consider within that framework of leadership is perhaps a dedicated manager and or management team with specific responsibilities. For example, they will be doing daily reviews, you know, to cope with the changing guidelines, latest news, reports from within the organisation. So you can see how this is more effort, if you like, that would be required over and above a sort of routine health and safety management. overseeing the planning, so risk assessment review and procedural updates, overseeing improvement actions, so ensuring they're allocated for action and targeted for completion, and COVID-specific surveillance, so inspections and ad hoc conversations on all levels. So even if it's a casual conversation, you know, the dedicated manager team is going out there and actually talking to people and getting involved hands-on in seeing how your COVID precautions are being complied with. And aiming for sort of involvement and buy-in of the workforce, sort of consideration of COVID-specific communication and consultation media. It's a bad idea to rely entirely on signs, notice boards, and distribution of printed procedures and risk assessments. I don't think you're going to find that that's going to be enough. So you need, where possible, you know, distancing considerations considered, sort of more face-to-face and direct contact with people, like the toolbox talk type idea. And I think Mark's got some examples of that kind of thing, supplementary to normal sort of safe working procedures. So the purpose, what your aim for this is to reinforce your rules, but allow for participation and feedback from the people that actually have to put these rules into place. Give you a chance to explain the reasons for your measures and the implications. As we said, you know, you could be jeopardizing your company, your job, you're putting your families and your colleagues' families at risk. You know, really lay it on about the implications of non-compliance and repeat them frequently. This is a difficult thing, but ensuring you're involving the participants, it'd be difficult. So you need to sort of manage this carefully, not to get tedious and boring, but ensure that you get the message over. Okay, next one, please, Neil. Many of you do this already, but for production reasons, although you know, the best ones will be also mentioning health and safety issues. If you don't already, consider a pre-start, pre-shift meeting, or you know, include COVID issues in existing facilities. So if you have one already, consider bringing in COVID-specific issues into that. And again, encourage feedback at this brief pre-start, pre-shift meeting. Ask for opinions, but use that opportunity to reinforce rules and reiterate your policies, and don't be shy to explain the reasons behind this. Committees, I think everyone will agree that a health and safety committee is not for all organisations. They're not always used in the right way. People seem to think that they must have one. That isn't normally the case unless you're a unionised organisation and there's a specific request to do so. They're not always effective. Sometimes the wrong people want to take part in them. They want to use it as a sort of a personal soapbox rather than for the good of the organisation. However, you know, these could be feasible for some of you, but you need to make sure it's got the right constitution to get the participation at all levels and some proper shop floor involvement with it as well. However, you know, you probably need to consider, if you are going to be able to run this kind of thing, that you might need to run it more frequently to be useful than a traditional health and safety committee. Just to make sure that we don't miss them out, large numbers of people now on the administration side especially will be working from home, but the same principles of communication, you know, have to apply to them as well, because they have their own issues. I think many people started off not appreciating that they would be having people working from home for such a prolonged period of time. So you need to make sure that you know, their situations, personal situations, and physical situations, where they're, you know, down to the basics of their workstation setup, are okay. And there can be a temptation to think, you know, it's out of sight, out of mind. So management should encourage and schedule more frequent one-to-one communication. That's certainly what I'd recommend now. So next one, please, Neil. Also, off-site workforce. You know, the people like your sales teams, drivers, doing deliveries and stuff like that. You don't have the luxury of being able to directly contact them in the same way as your sort of on-site workforce, but your system should set the standards for off-site behaviour and the standards that your people should be expecting from other sites. So they would need some specific instruction and some reference material with that. You need to communicate with these people more frequently than you might have done in the past, to also to even more reinforce their sense of personal responsibility, because they don't have any supervisory personnel or management. They're not managed hands-on in the same way that your on-site staff would. And you need to encourage that they will feed back to their supervisors, managers, in cases of doubt. And very importantly, they should be empowered to walk away if a situation can't be resolved. So they need to take their personal responsibility here. It's at a slightly different level, but we've got we're also a UCAS accredited inspection body. So our guys on that side of the business have been working throughout the pandemic, because they were carrying out safety critical inspections on tower cranes, forklift trucks, lifts, and stuff like that. And because of the nature of their work, they're very familiar with this point of work risk assessment system. But we lay it onto them and don't lose any opportunity. And even though they're sort of professional engineers, we don't lose any opportunity to stress to them that they have the right to walk away. In fact, it's not just a right, it's also a duty to walk away if they are not happy with a particular situation. Okay, last slide, please, Neil. So to summarize all of that, you need to manage, communicate, consult, and involve, and make sure that your management is visible at all levels, including the top level, wherever that is practical to do. So that's all I'm going to say for the moment. So I'm happy to take any questions throughout the, if you think of anything that you'd like to ask about any of that, be happy to stick around to the end to answer them.
Andy, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. A good strategic sort of overview of, or a catch-all of your system of work during COVID times. That was great. I think we'll keep questions to the end, because we're going to move on now, and some of the questions may well be answered in the next session. So we're very fortunate to have Mark Ryan here from Logson Group. He's going to share with us a presentation which he's put together, working safely with COVID-19, based on his own experience at Logson. Thank you.
Oh. Hello, am I, can you hear me? I think I might still be on mute.
Yes, can hear you, Mark.
You hear me? Yeah, okay, thanks, Tim. Thanks for your presentation, Andy. That's really interesting, and I think just interesting to look at COVID from a different angle, and sort of think about some of the issues with some of the measures that we've put in and what can go wrong and what we can do about it. So if you just move on for me, please, Neil. So just in sort of way of an agenda and what I'd like to cover today, just a little bit of an overview around the government guidance, working safely during coronavirus, which is what we at Logson really have based our approach around, very strictly following government guidance. And then just pick out some of the priority actions from that government guidance, just to give you a bit of an appreciation of how we've approached implementing the guidance at Logson. And I guess it'd be really interesting for us to just get any feedback on whether any of you have done anything differently or anything you think we can improve on. We have actually had 3 interactions with the HSE at 3 of our sites, so I'll just give you a bit of a flavour for what the HSE were looking for and how those interactions went. And then I guess obviously we'll just do questions at the end, if anything for in this presentation or Andy's. Okay, so if you just like to move on, Neil. So this is the guidance document from the government, which I'm sure you've all seen before. So it's actually a really good document. To be fair, it gives you a list of things that you should be doing, and then gives you a reasonable amount of guidance on how to do it. So it's sort of for the health and safety people among you, it's the equivalent really of an approved code of practice. So if the HSE were to come in, this really would be the foundation of their audit. So if you can demonstrate that you're compliant with this document and that you're keeping up to date and managing compliance on an ongoing basis, then you would be you'd be in a good place. I just included just a hyperlink there, and just a watch point really, that the government do update this guidance as they update everything really on quite a regular basis. So it's worth just checking it, probably really on a weekly basis. And there's an update page at the front, which is quite useful because it tells you what page has been updated and just a brief summary of what that update is. Okay, if you can just move on again, Neil. So these priority actions, what actually they've been picked out from the government on their website. So on the same page that you've got the link to the previous guidance, these are what the government have picked out as the real priorities. So again, if sort of the HSE were to visit, these would be the ones that you'd really want to be able to give a robust answer for, and have a degree of evidence that you've got suitable controls in place. So I guess the big one really, and what everything else stems from, is your COVID-19 risk assessment. So I've got an example of how we've gone about doing that, which I'll talk through. Clean more often, really, which I think speaks for itself. And the areas of interest are where people are touching surfaces, so door handles, machinery control, so anybody where any sort of area where you've got people touching things on a regular basis. Make sure everyone is social distancing. Again, I think that sort of really speaks for itself. Increase ventilation where you can. Obviously, this potentially sort of poses questions around other risks, sort of around security, fire potentially. So I think you have to be quite controlled in how you go about increasing ventilation. Take part in the NHS test and trace, so that you're keeping record of visitors to site. You sort of keeping records of shift patterns and who's on what shift. So if you do have to supply information, that it's readily available. And as I think we have all been doing from the beginning, have a process for turning people away with coronavirus symptoms, just making sure that you've got sort of prominent signs in reception and that everyone's aware of what the symptoms are. Okay, Neil, if you'd like to move on. So I think point number 7 around PPE is where we've had probably the most amount of questions. Why aren't we wearing PPE? Should we be wearing PPE? But the guidance actually is very clear that in sort of a work environment, PPE over and above what you normally wear doesn't actually offer a particular amount of benefit. So it's not something that's recommended within the guidance. One that we've been able to use quite successfully is ensuring that the teams that we have are fixed and that people are working within the same team each day. Arrange workspaces to keep staff apart. We've actually found that the design of our machines with sort of the feed end and the takeoff end actually lend themselves quite well to social distancing. And also if there is a 2-man sort of feed, it tends to be on on pieces that are over 2 meters, enables us to maintain the sort of 2 meters. Make sure you've got process in place for inbound and outbound goods, and how you manage delivery drivers. And number 11, again, it's quite a key point for us actually, that we didn't think we really fully appreciated in the first place, is how people communicate on the shop floor, especially in noisy environments, and that people sort of, that's where they really are in danger of coming within 2 meters of each other when they're talking to each other, especially with the sort of noise issues. So it's doing all you can really to keep noise to a minimum. Okay. Just to say the priority actions, there's just a bit of a health check on the government website, not just to focus on these priority actions, that you make sure that you consider the guidance in full. Okay. So this was our approach to implementing the government guidance at Logson, of which Cardboard Box Company are with us today, and Gavin from Box and Packaging are part of. So we developed a checklist using the government guidance. Sort of checklist refers back to the government guidance, and each site then did a self-assessment against that checklist and identified action plans. And then we sort of monitored the implementation of those action plans to make sure that they were all complete. We identified any tasks where people are likely to come within 2 meters of each other. And that's where we really focused our attention in terms of risk assessment. We developed what we called 1-point lessons, or you could call them toolbox talks really, I guess, for any tasks where we couldn't maintain the 2 meter distance. I'll just go through an example of one of those. And then I think sort of going back to Andy's presentation around trying to keep it live with people and trying to sort of ensure compliance, we added it to our inspection process, checks of social distancing, and also sort of communicated to our team leaders the importance of reminding people, because obviously it's a new way of working for all of us. And then each site was asked to develop some site-specific rules. I think what we found was that some sites were able to do one-way systems, some weren't. Just as sort of one example. So I think site-specific rules were very important, so that they were then developed and communicated. Okay, if you want to move on. So we've had 3 interactions with the HSE. Boxes and Packaging in Doncaster, Cardboard Box Company in Accrington. Both of these were done via either email or phone conversations. The key document they were really looking for was the risk assessment, and then how we'd communicated the findings of the risk assessments and the controls that we've put in place to the shop floor. So the Cardboard Box Company was actually a phone interview. Phone interview with the operations director. The HSE were happy with the answers that Nick was able to give, and on the basis of that, there was no sort of site visit required. I think from my discussion with Nick, I get the feeling that if you weren't confident, you didn't have robust answers to the questions the HSE were asking, that a site visit would probably follow. Box and Packaging in Doncaster, this was sort of back towards the beginning of sort of the pandemic, and again it was managed via emails. They did ask a question on one of our specific tasks in the warehouse around assembly, but on the basis of those questions we were actually able to improve the process. So I think the interactions with the HSE overall have actually been quite positive, and the Dumbarton site up in Scotland, this was a site visit. So the HSE actually came to site, did a visit. They were there for about between half an hour and an hour, walk around the shop floor, discussions with the operations manager. They were very happy with what they saw on site and the documentation that the team at Dumbarton could hand over. Just had one small suggestion around increasing cleaning frequency on door handles. So quite a minor sort of point, but I think overall the interactions with the HSE have been quite positive, which is obviously good. That's my presentation, Neil. I don't know if you wanted me to talk through the checklist or talk.
I think a flavour of the checklist would be great. I know that's probably a group-wide document that you may not be willing to share, but any insight you can give to people to create their own would be great.
Yeah. If you want to bring up the Excel, Neil, we're happy to share.
Okay, I'll just find that in a second, hopefully. Yeah.
So if anybody wants a copy of anything today, I can create a blank version, and then so if you just go to the first tab, Neil, please.
Yeah, on dashboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So basically, it's a way of sort of tracking at quite a high level. We had, I think I can't remember how many objectives on there. I think there's around 8 objectives. Is it 10 objectives? So, for example, complete a review of the government guidance, and then complete the checklist. Ensure all actions from the checklist are complete. And then this is what was reviewed by the MD and Gavin, the CEO for Logson Packing, just to make sure that everything was in place. And then if you just go on to the next tab, Neil, please. And just scroll down a slight little bit. So if you just see there, you've got just a number, then the check. This is basically pointers from the guidance. So what we've done is broken down the guidance into individual checks that we can sort of measure compliance against. See there, it says section of guidance. That relates back to the government guidance document. So you can get any more sort of information on what you need to do to comply with each check. And then column M is simply just where each site says that, yes, we are now happy that we're compliant with that. Because when we first did the checklist, there was a lot of no's. So then if you just sort of go to the action plan, Neil, on the next tab.
Oh.
Then the action plan tab is all the actions that the site needed to do to turn the checks on the checklist to compliant. So sites had a varying number of actions that they needed to implement. So these action plans go right back to the start of COVID. So that's sort of how we managed it. And then the next tab, Neil, is just the risk assessment. So we only did risk assessments of tasks where we thought there was potential for people to come in within 2 meters of each other, or within 1 meter, which obviously increases the risk. Then this risk assessment just follows its way all the way across, sort of asking some of the questions from the guidance. Is the duration as short as possible? Number of employees involved low as possible? And then if there's any existing control measures, if you're happy with the existing control measures, or you need to do some more. And the HSE have seen these and all those sort of incidents, and they were sort of happy with this as a format. So it gives us a bit of confidence that we're going in the right direction. And then if you just go to the final tab, Neil, there's like an escalation plan. This is a new requirement of the guidance to have what we've called a workplace outbreak plan. So this is where you get more than 2 people testing positive within the same sort of isolation period. And there's points that they ask you to have. So they ask you to have a single point of contact and a deputy. And they also ask you to make sure you know who your Public Health England contact is, and that you've got their telephone number so that you can contact them in the event of an outbreak. So that's sort of the checklist and what we've called our COVID-19 working safely plan. I guess the next document then is, how am I doing for time?
You're fine.
Okay. And if you just bring up the Word document, Neil, please.
Is it that one? No?
Yeah, that's the one. So we've done what we called 1-point lessons, which are really additions to the safe system of work. So we've obviously got detailed safe systems of work for each one of our machines. And 1-point lessons are sort of temporary additions, although it's becoming a bit more permanent at this stage. So if you just scroll down a little bit, Neil, please. But you can just see there, these are just where we think there's potential for people to become within 2 meters, we just created these one-page guides that just gives people quite simple sort of instructions on what they need to do differently for each machine where there is a potential. So, for example, feeding is a one-man operation, and then you can see where possible we've sort of included floor markings just to help people on a day-to-day basis as a bit of a reminder. Yeah, so that just goes on in a similar sort of vein, really.
Good document.
Yeah.
And you've made that available, did you say, Mark, or it just illustrative?
Yeah, if anybody wants a copy of any of the documents that I've sent to you, Neil, today, happy for you to share those.
Great.
Mark, that is very, very kind. You've obviously done a lot of work there, and as a sort of boilerplate for some of us smaller plants, it's great. It's a sanity check that what we've done is somewhere near, but it'll also sweep up a few things that we've missed, I'm sure. So on behalf of the SPA and all our members, thank you very much for that content.
You're welcome.
Great. There we
Brilliant.
go.
Well, I hope you all found that very, very useful. Does anybody have any specific questions for Mark following on from his presentation? There was a lot of detail there, but if there are any questions, feel free to throw them at him now, putting him on the spot.
Tim, in the chat, there was two questions and a specific one, which I think is very pertinent, from Brian, which was about the HSE being supportive, or are they trying to catch out employers? That may be for later, but I wonder if it's worth introducing now.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it would be useful for anybody else on this call who's had any experience of HSE involvement over the last 6 months. Then perhaps you could share your experiences now to see either what you feel they were trying to find or get at, or what you thought might have been a pitfall that you either avoided or fell down. That would be useful. Does anybody have experience of HSE involvement, either on the phone or as a factory visit?
May I just pick on what Mark said about the phone call that we had, and speaking to Nick, the manufacturing director, he said that in his opinion the HSE inspector was almost light-hearted, was not intimidating in any way, apart from the fact that he was shit scared when he was answering the questions. But the point was, he didn't particularly really drive into, because the answers that he was getting. One thing he did ask about, though, was about face masks and where they were used and why they weren't used. And another thing he did sound very forceful about, if there was the policy on the website. And I don't know if everybody's got the policy on the website. I think it was a government regulation early doors, but that was something. So just to mention from the conversation that took place with the HSE.
Thanks for that, Ken. Anybody else have any experience?
Chris?
Yeah, we had a phone call. Also, I had a phone call, and they were incredibly, sort of helpful. Really, they wanted to know things like where we as a company got our information from. So one of the things that we sort of I spouted on about was the SPA and CPI information was coming out daily at that time. So they liked that. Didn't mention the website at all and a policy on the website. So that was quite interesting. And obviously they wanted to know about the risk assessment, how we communicated with our employees, and weirdly, what would we do? What would we tell them to do if they had any symptoms, which didn't include coming to work or going to a hospital. So pretty much the same. And they said that they would review the answers, and we may or may not get a visit, which we haven't so far.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. Anybody else have any experience of HSE
Public Health
involvement?
England staff, we had an outbreak on one of our sites with 3 colleagues. Similar as other people were saying, telephone interview, then on answers, whether they come and visit us. They seemed quite happy, but they was happy and confirmed that we were low risk. We did start from the start of the conversation, talk about shut the site down 14 days. But we come away from that after.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further insight into health and safety executive? Yeah, Andy.
We have a client who has an ISO 45001 client who had some very good systems in place for health and safety generally, and also COVID. They were open enough with us, as you're supposed to be, of course, with your certification body, in that they had a visit from HSE. What the disappointing thing was, and what they would have to go away and look at, was the fact that it was outside whistleblowing that had prompted the visit from the HSE. And considering the mechanisms that this company had in place, they had an active health and safety committee, shop floor representation, visible management, and yet still there was somebody who was either had this idea of resentment or just bloody mindedness, who wanted to blow the whistle. And that example that Neil sent round, where there were blanked out faces of people sort of standing around a desk, to be honest, didn't look too terrible to me. But you have to ask what sort of mechanisms that organisation had in place, whereby someone didn't feel that they could approach management and air their grievances there, or their health and safety rep, or whatever. So this is the thing with the communication. In this particular case, the HSE visited, and the inspector said that unusually she was not going to issue an improvement notice. Every company that she'd visited so far during the pandemic, she had issued an improvement notice, but there was just some advice given. It was enough to for a fee for intervention to be levied, of course, but they were supportive and even praising the organisation. Another quick thing to say, I noticed that on Mark's instruction documents there, the supplements to the Safe Systems of Work, there was a sign-off sheet at the end, and some of you will know how boring I am about ensuring that you get, if you issue anything like that, if you have a toolbox talk, that you get people to sign off and acknowledge the fact that they've seen it and they've understood it. It can be used in your defence, and also it concentrates the mind of the person who's signing it off to ensure that they've understood it. Okay, I'll go back on mute now. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Andy. That's great. Any other comments or questions around HSE involvement before we move on to some softer items? Okay, I'll take silence as being that's exhausted that subject. But that was great. That's good insight for those of us who have been unbothered by the HSE. But it will come, I'm sure. I think they've got a duty of care to get around most manufacturing businesses, indeed most retail businesses as well, and just see what's going on. But it sounds like they're being helpful rather than trying to trip people up and find people, which is refreshing, I have to say, from the HSE. So great news. I have a question around mental health and well-being. We have quite a few staff who have been furloughed for a long period of time. Some people who've had long periods of employment whilst other people seemingly were sat in the garden getting paid. And it has had a toll on some people's well-being, mental health. We've had a couple of people we've had to enforce some leave because they really weren't focused and functioning as we would have expected them to. And we sort of pinpointed mental health as being a concern. I'd like to ask whether anybody has looked at that as a company, and specifically whether anybody has trained and installed a mental health and well-being first aider. It's a question that came up, or a topic that came up a couple of times on our Zoom calls last week as converter members of the SPA. And perhaps I could ask Neil Osmond just to sort of explain his involvement with that and how it helps.
Yeah, will do. I'm involved with both packaging businesses and businesses that are customers of packaging businesses, and with one in particular, we wanted just to do that little bit more for our employees. We have a series of people who are working from home and have been working from home until a couple of weeks ago, and then a core of people that were undertaking logistics and manufacturing activities, so sort of frontline staff who couldn't avoid being in a close proximity to each other. And we noticed some different strains on those different sets of people. People working in an environment together, a little bit of angst perhaps that they were working and other people weren't. So there was a sort of the background to that. And then people working from home, we found actually a bit isolated, and they were struggling with working away. So what we undertook was to have a look at this, and Mind have an excellent free course on mental health first aid and first aiders. And so this idea of actually somebody being added to the team as a first aider, but just happens to be called a mental health first aider, is becoming quite the norm. As I said, I've been active with one customer, but a number of customers that I'm speaking with are picking up on this role, this function. And what it does is it helps to gently raise the subject, and probably in things like job chats, they're adding the Mind. There's a template that Mind have, and we're happy to share that with people on this call and those that are interested off the call, on a way to be able to approach this mental health concerns, or just yes, concerns as a result of COVID. So a brief summary, Tim.
No, that was great. It would be good to have a show of hands. I can see pretty much everybody on the screen. If you have actually installed a mental health and wellbeing first aider yet. Well, you're a trailblazer, Neil. That's great news. Well done.
Well, we are.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly going to undertake it because you know, it seems like a very logical and caring thing to do for your staff. And ultimately, the payback will be people aren't off for prolonged periods of time sick. So not only is it a responsible thing to do, it's actually a very practical thing to do as well. So I would urge people to look into that and to look at the Mind course. Is it a 2 or 3 day course, Neil? I can't remember.
I think it took about 3 days for the people at Wildlife World.
And that's something you do from home. It's a virtual course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's online.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, and probably a good idea to get 2 or 3 of your staff to do it, so there's always somebody on site should anything occur.
Absolutely. Yeah, as with first aiders, so we've done it on there's 3 sites, so we've got a person per site, so there's at least 3 in the business. So, and I think it was extended from back to work interviews. You know, one of the good practices that we talked about 2 or 3 months ago was back to work interviews. That seems to have gone down well, and this is just a natural extension of that, I think.
Very good. It sort of works hand in glove with some of the support we've got from Westfield Health as well as the Sheep Plant Association. They do have counselling and things available for employees should they need it. We've actually got one member of staff at the moment who has been off and on. It's clear that his mental health isn't where it needs to be. And we've actually found some counselling for him. He's an ex-serviceman, and we've managed to access some counselling for him that way. But that was ad hoc. I would much prefer to have a go-to person or persons who could deal with the softer side of mental health. I think that's, as a responsible employer, that's probably a very good thing to do.
Yeah. Tim, there was a question that was raised earlier through the chat, and it was, it's a philosophical question. I don't know, how long is COVID going to be with us? And it was sort of, lockdown, partial lockdown, social distancing and wearing masks. So, and I think just, I raised that question.
Yeah, I think everyone will have an opinion. I don't think we have any doctors on the call, but we have a close, Chris Bywater always has an opinion on these things. Is he still on the call?
Yeah.
Can we hear your opinion, Chris?
Never going to go away, is it? It's 2 years minimum. I think that it's not a bad thing. To be fair, half the stuff that we've done, in hindsight, you'd be looking to do it, to stop general illnesses anyway. So, washing hands, and we've actually installed these handless door handles on, so step and pulls they're called, and you open the doors with your feet, which actually they work with door closers fine, and quite frankly, we should have put these on the toilet doors from day one, but so I think that a lot of it's going to carry on for several years.
Just tell us what those opening things are called again.
They're called step and pull, and in fact, our engineer, I think, had seen them at another site, and literally you go online. I would get the original ones rather than the cheaper ones off eBay, but they're $29 or something like that a pop, and you literally, it's like an upside down hand like that comes off the back of your door, and you put your foot on it, push down slightly, it's at floor level, and you do a little bit of a dance move like that, and the door opens. We haven't had any complaints, and it's just an option. People don't have to use it if they want to use the door handle, but every door we've got in the business now has one of these step and pulls on. Maybe
you could do a 1 minute lesson for us, or a 1 second lesson or whatever, Chris. Sorry, moving on. I've had a question from Bruce, or a comment actually, Bruce, who's joining us but can't speak, was just saying, in addition to, it was back to the well-being side, was saying that also a full-time carer as well as being employed, and this is presenting many challenges in our society at the moment. So I guess the widening issue of older people, care homes, etc., I think is still a major part of it.
Yeah, we've certainly had a couple of members of staff who weren't keen to come back at all because they still felt they had shielding duties, and one employee who felt that he had to give up his employment to become a full-time carer for his father who had COPD. So we mustn't underestimate the personal challenges people have with this illness. We see them at work. We don't know their home lives. We just have to be responsible and sensitive to people's needs. Is there anything else that you'd like to bring up? Anything else in the chat room there, Neil, that is worth discussing?
I think I've picked up the questions. I mean, there was a number of questions about can we have a copy of the presentations and the such like, and as Mark indicated, he's very happy for us to share those great documents from BMP. So it's our intent to share them. And I think
there was one thing that my colleague Wayne brought up, and I made a note at the time, and this may be something that Andy would have an opinion on. What might happen to Reach, any ramifications on Reach after Brexit?
I'm afraid I'd need to get a crystal ball out. It's a pretty complicated situation. Our managing director, who deals with manufacturing technology, recently circulated some reference material to do with CE marking, which I'm happy to pass on and circulate. But it's not something at the moment that I can offer any firm guidance on. REACH would only affect you, to the best of my knowledge, if you were supplying or repackaging and then supplying hazardous, harmful substances. So unless you're doing that, unless someone knows differently, I don't think REACH will affect you. Most of what you're doing, COSH, if you're following the requirements of COSH, most of you here, then you'd be doing everything that would be necessary. But I say, to the best of my knowledge, REACH would only apply to you if you were importing, supplying, repackaging hazardous materials, substances.
Okay, cheers, Andy.
Okay, super. Do we have any questions either for the group? We have some sheep plants here, or for our retained specialist, or indeed anybody else on the call. Anything that you would like to ask, shared experience or guidance.
Can I ask a question?
Katie.
You were talking about the step and pull. Does anyone else have any other gadgets or things that you'd be able to put into a health and safety report to say we're using this that's approved, or that people are finding useful? I've seen things like almost like key rings with hooks on them that you can open the door with and stuff like that. But in terms of actually in businesses, is there anything else other than the step and pull? Anybody?
Mm-hmm.
We were going to use one of those key ring things, but then we just thought, do you know what? It'll be cheaper in the long run to attach it to the doors, because we'll just keep on having to give more and more out as they get lost, pass it on to various other generations. So that's why we went with step and pull.
I've got a link to quite a good video from the BBC. It's not what we've done at Logson, but we find it quite useful in terms of generating ideas. One of the things on there was like a mobile screen for engineering that they could wheel around and sort of use, but I can send that on. You can have a look and see if it's something you want to share.
Thanks.
Good idea.
Thanks
you,
for that, Mark. I think Andy Ely had his hand up. Did you have some comments there?
Yeah, some people have done away with doors altogether, or left them open, or gone to an elbow operation, stuff like that. If you go back to the principles of risk control, you remove the hazard at source. So if you don't need a door there, then remove it. Maybe people have done that.
Go to the toilet, interesting, that one.
I wanted to ask Paul Hanley maybe just to say what they've done at Avanti, because I'm aware, I mean, you can see Paul isolated in this large room, but also in the offices and the introduction venue to Avanti. So Paul, I don't know if you...
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes we can.
Good. Yeah, like I was saying, I've only been at Avanti for just 4 or 5 months, but in terms of some of the things that we've done, and some of the interesting things really, one of the things that has been mandatory has been wearing face masks, and that's been in operation for nearly 2 months now. One of the things to comment about that is, I said before, we've got people that go into various customer sites to install kit, and the masks weren't a requirement on those sites, but we maintain that as part of our company requirements. And we got a bit of negative feedback really about the masks, in terms of people not being able to see people's faces, communication, why are you wearing them, we're not going to give you COVID. So that was quite an interesting feedback in terms of wearing masks. In terms of the site itself, we've really gone hard. Mark was aligning to pods and people working in the same groups. So we've got units here on site where people maintain those units, and the same when people go to site, we've maintained pods. So where we possibly can, the same people have been working together. And clearly, in terms of where I'm currently sat in the conference room, there's cleaning material. So there's an instruction when I leave this room that I clean the room. So we've got some sanitizer spray, we'll wipe the handles. Clearly, all the guys attending site take the temperature before they enter the site and record the temperature. And we're providing all the PPE. Recommended PPE in terms of so coming from larger organisations, I think at Avanti we've done a lot of good stuff. It's interesting to listen to you guys in terms of your risk assessments and certainly the stuff that you've done, Mark. So I've just seen that and thought, oh, we can do a bit more. But we've really tried to communicate and keep everybody safe under the mantra that, you know, safe workforce is a safe Avanti in terms of maintaining the business. So we've really focused on the pod aspect of the environment, inside and outside, and communicating to everybody the importance of not taking risks and looking after everybody. So there's always more to do, but I think they're the key points, and they're the key points that have come across in the presentation. So
thanks for that,
it's been really valuable. Thank you.
Clearly, there are a lot of people here who are manufacturing on a fixed site. You have added complications with staff going to, you know, effectively going out and doing maintenance, installations. So yeah, you're in an ever-changing environment. So it sounds like you put some good safeguards in place there. I have a sort of comment and sort of a question around COVID testing. In light of the fact that quite a few plants have had small outbreaks and had people isolated, but also a couple of examples where plants were closed. Box plants were actually closed for a period of time because of an outbreak. I want to talk about false negative tests. I have personal experience of this in that my brother got COVID quite early on. He was sort of just before Boris Johnson. He had it quite bad. But whilst he was in hospital, had 3 false negative COVID tests, despite being on a CPAP machine, and now his body full of antibodies and them spinning his blood to get the plasma. So false negatives are not rare. And it's important to understand that, so that you don't rely upon one COVID test to say, yep, come back to work, because that would be, in my opinion, folly. So at Dairy Pack, if we have cold-like symptoms and someone is off and gone and got a test, we are encouraging them to stay off for the full 14 days because false negatives are not that uncommon. So does anybody else have any comments or experience of that?
We've just had somebody who's had a negative test and stayed off for the week, but that was mainly to do with the fact that there was it took a week for her results to come back, quite frankly. But that's interesting.
And I think one thing I would add, it's important not to financially penalize these people, because it might actually be their finances that encourage them to come back to work. So this is really a comment for the owner managers of a business or people who are looking after wages and salaries. Please don't penalize people for being off. Otherwise they will come back early, because you know, finances or financial decisions can often dictate behaviors. So yeah, I throw that in for what it's worth.
Tim, just to add to that, false positives also occur. We've had some experience of that. And the only other thing I was curious about was your comment about cold-like symptoms, because my understanding is that the symptoms of COVID aren't necessarily the same as cold or flu-like symptoms.
No.
And I think particularly coming into the winter season, there is a danger if we accept every sniffle. So yeah, difficult judgment calls.
Yes, yeah, you're right. I mean, the symptoms are quite specific, aren't they? I use that as a general remark, but no, if you do have the cough and the temperature, regardless of your test results, we're encouraging people to stay off for 14 days.
Understood.
Very good. We're drawing towards the end of our allotted time. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask before we part company?
While people are mulling that question over, Tim, I'm mindful of Bruce joining in, and Bruce was making the point that the common cold, which there is no cure for, has been known to be a killer. So I think the approach that we're all having now about the cleaning regimes that we're having and masks and the such like, that there is a thought that there'll actually be less incidents of colds and flu and the such like. Let's hope we're healthier as a result. Yes, Wayne crosses his fingers there. Sorry, so that was just a fill in while people are, if they have any further questions.
Well, stony silence is always a good thing. It means that everything that people wanted to get from this call, they have gained, which is brilliant. So we'll keep these health and safety forums up. I would just like to thank everybody who attended today, and in particular, Andy Ely and Mark, because, some really good content there. If nothing else, it will reassure you that what you've done in your own plants is sufficient or good, and it may actually show a few gaps. And at the end of the day, it's safeguarding our people and combating this virus that is important here. So I know it's been very COVID specific, this call, but that's the environment we find ourselves in at the moment. So unless there are any last minute questions, or maybe Neil, you have a few comments to finish?
Just to say, actually, you've highlighted Andy and Mark. Thank you very much, both of you, for this very useful and specific forum, and also to welcome Brian, because as Brian Shirley said, he's actually come to see what the SPA are about. So I hope he's found this a useful sort of hour and a half of his life, as well as getting a nice suntan, and has found this particular aspect covered well by the Sheep Plant Association.
Definitely wishing I didn't put the jumper on.
That's all right.
Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, good. Thanks for coming, Brian.
Tim,
well, thanks for... Yeah, go on, Katie.
As a follow-up, we'll just send one email with all the links to all the presentations, so there'll just be one piece of information coming out to everyone. So if we can sort that out between us, just to make sure that Andy and Mark are happy for the things that they presented to go out to people as they are.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you virtually very soon.